In today's video, I've got an in-depth look at the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio, and the YouTube algorithm goes wild. I'm fully expecting this to be a huge viral hit, and really this video is continuing my look at the most common 4-note arpeggios. So previously I've looked at dominant 7th, major 7th and minor 7th, and I suppose what we're left with is what you could describe as the two weirdos. You've got the minor 7 flat 5 and the diminished 7th arpeggio, and I was going to lump both of those together in one video, but I actually think I'm going to save the diminished 7th arpeggio for another time and just focus on the minor 7 flat 5 in this video. And though certainly these two arpeggio types, the minor 7 flat 5 and the diminished 7, are less widely used than the other three arpeggio types, they're still very important sounds, and I think it's essential guitar knowledge that you understand what these things are and you're able to play them on the guitar. So what's the point of the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio? Well, certainly if you're remotely interested in jazz, then it is a very widely used, very commonplace sound, so you absolutely must know this stuff if you want to play jazz. But it also crops up in other styles of music as well, and I think for any player it's important that you recognize this sound and that you're able to respond to it in a musical way. So this video is going to be all about the minor 7 flat 5 sound. I want to start with a little bit of theory, then I'm going to show you how I lay out these arpeggios on the fretboard, give you the most commonly used caged shapes. I'm going to show you some exercises for further getting these arpeggios under your fingers and into your ears, and then I'm going to give you some applications and some licks. So let's get started. The minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio, also known as the half diminished arpeggio, that's a term you might sometimes come across. It means exactly the same thing. Now let's start with the theory, and I think the obvious place to start with this is from the perspective of the minor 7th arpeggio, which you're already going to know about because you've watched my minor 7th arpeggio video. If you've not seen that video, I'll put a link to that up on screen. And the way that the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio is constructed in terms of the intervals, it's kind of obvious from the name really. It's a minor 7th arpeggio with a flattened 5th degree. So if you remember the minor 7th arpeggio, let's do this from an A root note. We've got a root, a minor 3rd or a flat 3rd, 5th and a flat 7. So that's the minor 7th arpeggio. To make that a minor 7 flat 5, all we're going to need to do is flatten the 5th degree of this arpeggio. So the E becomes an E flat. We've now got A, C, E flat and G. You've got an octave A there if you want to. And in terms of intervals, that's a root, flat 3rd, flat 5 and a flat 7. So that's a simple minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. And if you wanted to, you could continue that up into the next octave as well. So again, taking the minor 7th shape as the starting point, you've got this. So this E note here is the 5th, so that's the flat 5th there. So that's the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. You might in fact want to play that E flat here instead, just refinger slightly, just so you're not reaching out of position for that E flat note. It's the same note, but we can play it here instead. I think that's a slightly more practical fingering. And you put all of that together and you've got a nice 2-octave A minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. And once you've got that basic shape under your fingers, you might like to find some other places where you can play this on the fretboard. I think ultimately you want to be able to play this all over the fretboard and in all keys. And the way I would tend to organize things is in terms of the caged system. Not the only way to do it, but for me it's the most practical, the most useful most of the time. And I'm just going to whiz you through the other caged shapes here. So the shape that I just showed you, you could describe that as the E form. It's kind of loosely related to this E shape bar chord. It's got that E form octave shape that it's centered around. And another thing that I tend to do is to associate my arpeggios with chord shapes. I think it's good to have those two things grouped together in your brain, and it helps you go from chords to arpeggios and to play over chords and just to see the relationship very clearly. So that's always how I practice these things. I'll play a chord shape, then the arpeggio, and have them grouped together. So with this shape here, you could think about this -7 flat 5 chord voicing. It's 5, 6, 5 and 5 in terms of the frets here. And I just play that chord and then play the arpeggio from root to root. So nice and clear, smooth, alternate picking. That's the first pattern of the -7 flat 5 arpeggio. If we continue on up the neck, we'll continue to do this from an A root note. We come to this shape here, the D form, and the chord shape would be this one here. So we've got fret 7, and then I'm just bowing across the top 3 strings at the 8th fret. And the arpeggio shape here would be that's the fingering that I use. You have got some options here where you could play certain notes on other strings if you want to, but decide what works best for you and try and make it as practical as possible. With this one, there is a one note where you just have to stretch outside of position here, but otherwise it's quite a comfortable shape, I think. And again, as with the other arpeggio shapes, I tend to play these from root to root. So you're hearing this arpeggio as centered on that A note. So up to the highest note, down to the lowest available note in this shape, and finishing on that root note. So up to the next form, this would be the C form or pattern 3. So the octave shape would be this. A chord shape here would be perhaps this one here, so frets 12, 10, 8 and 8, and then the arpeggio fingering would go like this. Again, practicing that from root to root. Next we'd be up at the 12th fret. This is the A form. There's our octave shape, and the -7 flat 5 chord voicing I would use here would look like this. So we've got frets 12, 13, 12 and 13. This kind of feels like a D chord shape, and then you've got your little finger squeezed in onto the B string at the 13th fret, and then the arpeggio would look like this. Again, you've got a note there where you just need to reach out of position, and it's the same note there down on the low E string, and coming back and finishing on the root note. Then the final caged shape would look like this. We're up into the G form, so our octave shape is that. A chord shape here would perhaps be this one. So a little bit of a squeeze if you're playing it this high up the fretboard. You could actually play it down here. You've got 5th fret, and then you're skipping or muting the 5th string, and then 5th, and then 4th fret. So A -7 flat 5. You can just about squeeze it in up here, and then the arpeggio shape. Like that, and you could play that same shape down an octave if you wanted to. And I'm going to be tabbing all of this stuff out, so if I'm going a little bit too fast for you in this video, then check out all of that stuff. It's going to be up on my Patreon page. So those are the caged arpeggio shapes that I would tend to use, and you might actually want to figure these out for yourself. So if you know your -7 shapes, then actually go through the process of identifying where the 5th is and flattening it, and really seeing the logic of these fingerings rather than just taking it from me, kind of spoon feeding you these shapes. I think that will be a good exercise. And if this is totally new information to you, it might take a bit of time to get to know these shapes. So start with just one of these shapes, really get to know it well, make sure you can play it smoothly up and down, make sure you've committed it to memory, and when you're ready, move on to the next one. When you're ready, you can try changing keys and playing these shapes in different places. Another thing you might like to try is some simple sequence type exercises, and I'm a big fan of these, and it's just a further way of getting these arpeggios under your fingers and getting the sound of them into your ears. So we could try just with our first minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio pattern, perhaps a group of 4 type exercise. So you're just playing 4 notes off of each degree of the arpeggio. So starting on the root, going up 4, and then from the flat 3rd up 4 from that, from the flat 5, and just taking that on through the arpeggios. So that would sound like this. And you could do a similar thing but with groups of 3 notes, so 3 notes from each degree of the arpeggio, so 3 from the root and then 3 from the flat 3rd, and so on up the arpeggio. And then descending. So all of that together. Let's move on to some applications for this sound. And as I said, it does crop up all the time in jazz, but sometimes you hear it in pop songs as well. And I can think of a couple of Elliott Smith songs where there's that minor 7 flat 5 sound, and I think McCartney occasionally uses it as well. So kind of more sophisticated pop songwriters will be occasionally using this kind of harmony. And this is perhaps stating the obvious, but if you do come across a song where there's a minor 7 flat 5 chord and you're not quite sure what it is or what it's doing there, you can do far worse than just play the notes in the chord, play the arpeggio, and that's always going to work. It's always going to sound good, and there's no need very often to do anything more sophisticated than that. I think sometimes guitar players often think, oh, I've got to do something complicated and sophisticated, but no, often just playing the notes in the chord is going to be the best option. So if you find yourself confronted with one of these chords and you need to solo over it or play a melodic part, then just try the arpeggio, and more often than not it's going to sound great. Now let's look at application number 1, and by far the most common place you'll find a minor 7 flat 5 chord is as part of a minor 2-5-1 progression, whether it's in jazz or whether it's in a kind of pop song context. That Elliott Smith song I was thinking of, it's one of his waltz songs, but it's got a minor 2-5-1 in that. There's I can't remember what the song is, waltz number 1 or 2, something like that, but it's there. This bit here, and then we've got the B minor 7 flat 5 E going to A minor. That's a minor 2-5-1. So if you know your theory, you'll know that that minor 7 flat 5 is a naturally occurring sound in the harmony of both the major scale and the natural minor scale. So in the major scale, if you build a chord off of the 7th note of a major scale, you get a minor 7 flat 5 chord, and it follows that it's the same chords in the natural minor scale, the relative minor scale, and from the root of a natural minor scale, then it's the 2 chord in the minor scale that is the minor 7 flat 5 chord. And often in jazz situations that is how it's used. So if we're in the key of A minor, then the 2 chord is going to be the minor 7 flat 5, and then you've got the 5 chord, which is generally a dominant chord or a altered dominant chord, and then the 1 chord is a minor 7. So we've got 2, 5 and 1. So in this case B minor 7 flat 5, E7 flat 9, A minor 7. And there are loads of jazz tunes that contain these minor 2-5-1 progressions. So obvious examples that spring to mind are Autumn Leaves, Blue Bossa, perhaps the tune There Will Never Be Another You. I can't think who wrote that, but Chet Baker does a great version of that. And it starts off, I think, if I do it in F major, we've got kind of the 1 chord, then it moves to the relative minor by way of a minor 2-5-1. So we're going from F major 7 to D minor, which is the relative minor, but we set up that relative minor, that D minor 7 chord, with a 2-5. So we've got so if I'm soloing over that chord progression, I might well approach that in an arpeggio type of way and use my E minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. So or perhaps so really both of those just variations on the same idea. So over the E minor 7 flat 5, going up the arpeggio and then going down 1 fret to hit the 3rd of the 5 chord. It really is a classic jazz move, a classic jazz sound. So the flat 7 going down 1 fret to the 3rd of the next chord, and then you can continue with some kind of 5 chord stuff and then hit the minor 3rd of the 1 chord. So lots of variations on that line. And I think I played a slightly busier version of that line where I went but based on a very similar kind of concept. So going up the arpeggio, connecting with the 3rd of the 5 chord, and then just playing some A7 stuff, and then finishing with some D minor 7 arpeggio. So really all of this arpeggio stuff that I've discussed in previous videos is coming together here. I'm able to connect between these various different arpeggio types. So minor 7 flat 5 to dominant 7 stuff to minor 7 stuff. So absolutely essential that you're in command of all this stuff if you want to play jazz. Another way that you could use a minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio might be over a dominant 7 chord in a bluesy kind of a context. And let me try and explain how this works. So you might like to think of this chord here. This is an A9 chord, so frets 5, 4, 5, 4, 5. Often you play that leaving out the root note. And what you might notice is this chord is actually a C sharp minor 7 flat 5, but if we've got an A underneath it, it becomes an A9. You might also think of this is perhaps a more common guitar voicing. An A9 up here, remove the root, and you have a C sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord. So it follows that we can use that minor 7 flat 5 over a dominant chord in that kind of context. So the way you access this sound is if you think about playing a minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio off of the 3rd of a dominant chord. So if we're playing a blues in A, if you're playing over the 1 chord, think about the 3rd of that chord, which is a C sharp, and you can play the C sharp minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio but over the A7 chord, and it gives you a really cool kind of sophisticated bluesy sound. So it's a cool sound, and there's a really nice lick in there actually, and I probably should have saved it for one of my nice lick videos. I've not done one of those for a while, but I'll show you this lick now, and it's the one that went like this. So all of this being played over A7, and I'm thinking about the C sharp minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. So I'm just sliding in to that C sharp note, and here I've got my kind of A form shape, and then I'm sliding up to this little shape here, so 9, 8, 7 on the top 3 string. So now I'm into this sort of next pattern of the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. This is kind of the G form. So going between those two forms here. And rhythmically it starts with 8th notes, 1 and 2, and got a little triplet on that shape up here. Nice. And you can also find the minor 7 flat 5 sound in the melodic minor scale and also the harmonic minor scale, I think. So the more advanced players amongst you might like to have a think about that. I'm not going to go into that stuff in this video. Maybe I'll save that for another time. I should just mention the gear that I'm using today, though this isn't a particularly geary or tone-centric video. I know that if I don't mention this stuff, I always get questions about it. So the guitar I'm using is my Trent Model 1. And if you'd like to know more about this guitar, I have done a full-length video demo of it, and I'll put a link to that on screen. And I'm not using an amp today, I'm just plugged straight into my Kemper profiler, and it's just a hassle-free way of getting a good sound. And the profile I'm using today, I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but it's some kind of black face Fender profile. That's it for this video. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope it's helped to expand your guitar knowledge a bit. I hope it's given you some interesting musical ideas to play around with. Now, I am going to be putting quite a few extra resources to accompany this lesson up on my Patreon page. I will tab out all of the arpeggio shapes. There'll be some fretboard diagrams. I will write out all of the licks as well. So check that out if you're interested. I do run the Patreon page on a pay what you like basis. So it's astoundingly good value. Pay what you like and you can get access to what is at this point quite a large archive of tabs and backing tracks. So take a look at that if you're interested. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.